You know what I was thinking about the other day?
Mm?
I was thinking about episode 1 of We're Not Pros.
Yes.
That was a great episode.
Which time?
The time that we actually filmed it and put it up on YouTube.
Yeah, I remember the pantless take. That wasn't the best idea.
I don't remember that patentless take. I think you're making that up. But that's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to redo episode 1 in HD, and we're going to add in all that extra content that you just made up on the spot.
We're gonna add in pantless version.
We're gonna talk about it.
Wait, just so we're absolutely clear, when I say pantless, shorts technically aren't pants. So if you think about it, anyone wearing shorts is technically pantless.
There is no way I will ever fully derail you.
I'm surprised it took you this long to realize that.
Yeah. The reason why we started with this sarcastic conversation is because today's episode is about nostalgia, or in my opinion, why I think nostalgia is bullshit. Say no to nostalgia.
And drugs.
Well, it's a case-by-case basis when it comes to drugs.
Okay.
But on nostalgia, yeah, across the board, I don't care for it whatsoever.
All right. Take it away, Johnny.
Okay, so first of all, what is nostalgia? Covering that base, I think, is an important thing to do. Might as well.
Yeah, it's a longing for a different time or a different feeling, or perhaps something. If you even just get as general as you want to, you step into a mall in Christmas time and you're hearing the same Christmas songs,
Yeah.
sometimes even the same singers of the songs that our parents heard, because they're recreating the Christmas of our parents' past.
I'm a huge Mad Men fan, and Don Draper does a speech about nostalgia in the end of the first season, and the definition that he uses is that it's the pain of an old wound. And it makes sense, because what happens is when you're remembering something when you were younger, you get that twinge, and it feels good, but it's also painful because you're not there anymore. Like, you've grown up, you're in a different place in your life now. Maybe that place, because it was in your past, you can't help but think of it as a better time, even if it's not a better time. And there's that part of you that wants to go back and re-experience that, and that's what nostalgia is being used as a tool, or as a marketing thing.
The grass was always greener before you were colorblind.
Right. Now, how does nostalgia tie into video games? Well, apparently, a lot of video games are using a nostalgic edge to get people to buy something that they might not necessarily have bought otherwise.
Well, I think it's a little simpler than that. Video games, compared to every other form of media, is not actually that old. I mean, if you want to talk about books and be nostalgic for books, you go back to the very beginning and you've got Beowulf and the Bible, and there's another major example, which I'm going to remember in about 10 minutes and just shout out in the middle of a conversation when it's not relevant, but I don't remember it right now.
The Necronomicon by H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know. I was just thinking the first thing that...
No, Karma Sutra, maybe. But like, it's been around for the written word's been around for so long, even what we perceive as the novel has been around for so long. Movies have been around for about 100 years. Yes, they've changed form. But if you want to talk about being nostalgic about video games, how many versions of Pong are there out there? Is Pong really bad? Is Breakout bad? I mean, when you look at games that advance to a certain point, okay, writing first started as pictographs on a wall, and then we got the novel. So you can go ahead and argue things like Pong and Adventure were the writing was just writing on the wall. Then you have the generation of the actual novels, and if you do it like that, which is pretty reasonable, then the generation of when the video games became actual video games was only, 30 years ago, maybe, at the most?
Yeah, but video games, yes, they are, 30, 35 years old. However, gaming as an abstract concept has been around for probably as long as the original writings on the wall.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Even if it was something as simple as man picks up stick, man tries to throw stick at saber-toothed tiger, man gets killed, it's still a game that is being played.
Now, yes, those are the days.
Now, what I feel like is happening way too often is when you're taking a game that maybe came out in a couple of generations ago, say the PlayStation 1 generation or the Super Nintendo generation, and you're updating it and you're remaking it for no good reason. Now, when I play a game, or when I'm choosing what game it is I want to play, I'm always holding it up to whatever standard that I'm currently holding up to whatever games that have come out recently. And what do I mean by that is basically if I'm going to go play a game that, say, came out on the Super Nintendo, if it's still not an enjoyable game to play, then I'm not going to bother playing it. I don't care if it is a relic of my past or not. For me, a great example of a Super Nintendo game that to this day is still fun to play is Smash TV. If you've never played this one, I highly recommend doing it because here's an example of a very simple premise. You're a contestant on this futuristic game show where it's okay to shoot people, and you just go from room to room collecting prizes and gunning down hundreds of these bad guys, and it's easy to play. You get what you're supposed to do, and I don't feel like I need to play another version of this. I feel like the way it came out originally was fine. And I noticed that about some games is that when they came out, they were as the developers knew what they were doing. They didn't feel like, oh well, this game will be okay, but when we make version number 5 of it down the line, that will be the perfect version. That'll be the good one.
So remembering how all the Gaiden games have come out with Sigma versions or Edge versions or whatever versions. Well, yeah, I sort of agree with that. I mean, there have been some innovations. I mean, it's not just flashy graphics. We have had the ability to have more advanced kind of projectiles, power-ups. Multiplayer was obviously something that wasn't around a lot in the beginning. I think, nostalgia may not in fact be the problem. Wanting to go back to simpler times is fantastic. I mean, we were growing up in the 90s. What was wrong with the 90s?
Nothing. The 90s was the best generation.
With the exception of a couple of music bands, but, you can easily just turn the radio off.
You're not talking about Smash Mouth, are you? Because if so, this show's over, and I'm never talking to you again. I'm just.
If I don't know who they are, does that count?
You don't know what Smash Mouth is?
We're talking about video games.
Okay, right. I always figured that they were just one of those guys that everybody knew, even if not necessarily everyone liked them. But you're right. Not the perfect time to have that conversation. Well, I'll stop.
And you've completely derailed me.
So it was possible after all. Okay, so what you are saying is that gameplay has improved quite a bit. And and the thing is that we need to remember that just because gameplay has moved in a certain direction, it doesn't devalue kinds of gameplay that we had experienced when we were younger. And a good example of that is somebody like Serious Sam, who has to hold on to 12 weapons at once versus a modern military shooter where you get 2 weapons and
then there's cover to hide behind and the enemies actually care whether they live or die. I remember there was this moment in Serious Sam 2, there's this it's this open space but still has walls around it, so it's big enough for you to move around and dance and probably even play a couple of rounds of football in. But then you got all these enemies charging you, and I think if you just take any modern military shooter and put it in there, they got no idea what's going on. There's no cover to hide behind. There's no, standard assault rifle. I guess you did have the minigun. And, it would throw a lot of them off because you had to be incredibly strategic which guns you used on which enemies, and you had to kill a certain number of them before they got here. You had to make sure all this type of enemy was dead before they got here. You had to, deal with this before you got here. Then, at least me and I think several other people, just by the time, they were just out, all they had left was a flamethrower, and they're facing skeleton minions who have great melee attacks, so you're just jumping around them doing the flamethrower. Essentially, originally, holding 12 weapons was actually a technical limitation. Mm-hmm. Instead of having actual weapon slots, you would have the pistol slot, the link gun slot, the shock rifle slot, the bio launcher slot, the rocket launcher slot, and then as soon as you found the weapon, that slot became active. So that kind of was a side effect of the technology at the time. Same thing with... I'm pretty sure they couldn't do regenerating shields back then, but a lot of, the lack of reloading was another thing that it took extra code to do that, so why bother? And then you have a lot of people, including myself, pining for days like that because you have modern games have two-gun system. They have reloading. They have an entirely different feel.
Regenerating shields, even if you're not wearing a suit of armor.
Yep. Call of Duty.
Yeah.
But you have an entirely different feel of a game now, which I guess kind of started from advancements. I mean, when Halo did the two-gun system, I think a lot of people was there a two-gun system before Halo, actually?
Two-gun system for Halo.
I really don't feel
possible, but not likely.
Because I feel like whenever you play a World War I game, you've got a rifle, you've got a pistol. I don't think they use shotguns.
Counter-Strike had a three-tiered weapon system. You would have one primary, one secondary, a knife, and then grenades. But a knife wasn't a firearm, so it was just two weapons. But Counter-Strike was a step forward in terms of trying to make a game come across as more realistic. But the difference is between like Counter-Strike, which didn't have sight aiming, it didn't have a proper cover system. You would just like literally crouch behind a crate and fit like that was as close to cover as it got. But it opted for a more realistic tone and theme because you were playing up either terrorists or counter-terrorists, and you were doing realistic things like planting a bomb or rescuing hostages, but it was still like shooting from the hip, which most trained professionals.
You were shooting from the shoulder. Can we just debunk that right now? There's no such thing as shooting from the hip.
It's a figure of speech. It's the difference between shooting from the hip, which is considered to be the less accurate thing because you're just kind of like spraying around everywhere, versus aiming down the sights where it suddenly goes up to your face like that.
Well, okay.
I mean, if you actually look at your allies, they're holding the guns at their shoulders.
If you look at your own screen, you've got your gun is this close, so you're like the whole hip shooting mechanic
it's totally debunkable, but I only say that as a figure of speech.
Yeah. All right. Well.
But anyways, you didn't have all the innovations that, say, Modern Warfare had added into realistic shooters, but they didn't stop Counter-Strike from feeling realistic. Because if you got shot a couple of times, you're dead. You had to work as a team like you would in real life. It used a lot of the same rules that would apply in this situation were it actually happening, versus when gameplay starts to try to make you feel like you're actually doing the same gestures that the other person is doing. It doesn't matter how close it gets. The fact that it's a video game is going to separate what you do as a player to what happens in reality. Because in modern shooters, or in actual war, I'm assuming after you get hit by a bullet, the bullet stays in your body, and if you don't receive medical attention, you bleed out.
Or even if you're wearing some kind of armor protection, the blunt force of getting hit by a bullet can make your heart skip a beat, or can really bruise.
It's not a force field.
Yeah. It's a matter, like, even getting hit. Bulletproof vests aren't even bulletproof vests, they're bullet resistant. They're designed to catch the bullet, but you can still get hit by the force. You can still have it actually go into you slightly.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I want to, try to
I think we kind of got off nostalgia.
Yeah, so if I want to put a point on, where I feel nostalgia isn't being used correctly, if there is a way to use it correctly, is that it's not the content that we reminisce, because the content serves the gameplay. It's the gameplay that we miss. It's when there's only one Serious Sam game coming out in the last 3 years, and we want to play more of it. Well, we're basically stuck playing the old ones. So it's nostalgia by consequence. But that kind of gameplay is still sought after by a lot of players, and there's still somewhat of a demand for it, even if it's not as much of a demand as it may have been before. If you look at Star Fox, there's a great example of a game where, we like the characters, we all hate Slippy, but we like that we hate Slippy. Crystal, the jury's still out, whatever. Fine.
Crystal's been turning people into full-fledged furries.
Yeah. What the Star Fox fans want is to continue playing the kind of gameplay that we really enjoyed from the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 one. Star Fox Adventures, not a Star Fox game.
I hope whoever decided
Barely
that,
even on a technicality.
it wasn't even originally supposed to be Star Fox. Originally, you were supposed to be a cat furry, and Crystal was your sister, and then they added Star Fox, and then it turned into this
pseudo Star Fox-ish kind of game
They
where
shoved in
you have the air wing sections and can't
whoever
even use your laser gun.
whoever designed that, I hoped burns in a hell with no lock on, and where you can't turn the craft sideways.
Um, then you get to Star Fox Assault on the GameCube, and there was a game where people like half liked it. The gameplay sections that were reminding us of what we did from like Nintendo 64 were great, and it wasn't because it was evoking fond memories of the time that I spent playing Star Fox 64. It was because the gameplay was just great.
Yeah.
Like flying around in those R wings feels good. Shooting down enemies out of the sky feels good. Saving your friends, I think, feels good. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy feeling like there's a lot of things happening.
I'm gonna keep that in mind.
Yeah. Whereas when you get to the land sections and the design just wasn't there.
You mean the on-foot things, right?
Yeah, the on-foot sections.
Yeah, I mean, they had to give you a whole arsenal of guns. They added all sorts of weird features to your pistol. They do all that kind of stuff. I mean, land sections in general, like in 64 and what I did play of Assault, I do like the Landmaster. I think it's a nice change on perspective. I mean, it's got its ups and downs, but it definitely doesn't destroy the game or somehow hurt it. I mean, the Blue Marine really was just a variant on the R-Wing, but
Yeah.
I'm remembering on Star Fox 64, the Landmaster sections were nice. The one Blue Marine level didn't really take anything away from it. It really just changed how your missiles work and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So, well, I mean, when we think Star Fox, we think he's in a ship doing Star Foxy things. I mean, yes, he is trained in ground combat, and he does have the pistol, but that's not really why we play the game. And it's a matter of we had this perfect formula, and it's not that we have these huge nostalgia goggles for the perfect formula, which essentially is Star Fox 64. It's a matter that they've yet to just say, okay, we've done this correctly. Let's build on it. Let's think about it. Let's try to go like, oh, no, now you're innovating, now you're innovating, now you're innovating. We don't need him to get out. Like, we don't need the back of the box to say, for the first time ever, Star Fox gets out of his R-Wing. Okay, so what is Star Fox without the R-Wing? And
He's just a fox in a jacket.
with cybernetic legs.
Yeah.
But it was a nice thing. Like, you had the right game there. You could have just done that. I mean, Mario, I think, is a great example, which has got a ton of nostalgia goggles, because for the longest time, they were doing something a little bit differently every game. I mean, one of the games, you were jumping on people to kill them. This game, you don't jump on people to kill them, you jump on them, and then you pick them up, and then you throw them at other people. It changed how mechanics work. I can tell you, when I first played that, I think I played the Game Boy Advance remake, it was a huge shock to jump on top of someone. I was like, nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm riding safely on top of this person. This is against, but it was something new, something interesting. And to an extent, recently, Nintendo's whole attitude of the new Super Mario Brothers pretty much just being an easier version of the original Super Mario Brothers with some kind of random power-up, whatever, is boring.
And you know what? If I had to choose between which of those two games I'm going to play, am I going to play the original Super Mario Brothers, or if I'm going to play the new SMB on, say, the Wii or the Wii U, I'm going to pick the old one, and it has nothing to do with these rose-colored goggles. It has to do with how much fun that game is to play and how it handles the multiplayer. I think the turn-taking dynamic, not only is it an interesting way of getting both players involved, but having them also compete with one another, but it's also a perfect way of using the Super Mario Brothers as a storytelling device, because you have to imagine you're Mario, your little brother is Luigi, just as Luigi is the little brother, and the both of you are going to go rescue the princess. Mario gets to World 3, and he falls, and he has to wait for Luigi to take his turn, and Luigi, he gets to the first level, he falls into the second level, and now the two brothers are separate, and so they're kind of playing their own separate stories, but they're both trying to get to the same destination. And your actions as that character do kind of reflect the relationship you might have with the person you're playing with. Because just imagine, like, say I'm playing with my brother, and he knows the warp pipe secret, and he goes all the way to the last level. I'm like, you're cheating, you're being cheap. He's like, that's life, brah. And that is terrific game design. Even to this day, it still works. Although I will say that there is a slight update to it on the Super Nintendo called Super Mario All Stars. Basically the same game, just with better graphics and better music. So that is the preferred version. But now you get the new Super Mario Brothers, and I don't want to say that these games are poorly designed. I think they were going for a different kind of feel. They wanted to go for more of the almost celebratory, everyone's together having a good time, all four of us running around playing kind of feel, and it kind of works, but they should have called it something else, or they should have just not made it a Mario game, because Super Mario Brothers, to me, is that original design document from the Nintendo Entertainment System. And that's the kind of game that I would love to have seen more of. I'm going to drink some water now, because that was a diatribe.
Well, okay, I'm trying to dissect this a little bit. We know what nostalgia is, and we both have some pretty good examples of just like these were older games that were good. I think like one of the points we briefly touched on is the idea that innovation has resulted in a lot of stampering of an older feel. The idea of the arena shooter, yes, I'm going to go back to this, I like Unreal Tournament, it was just an overall unique feel. It wasn't just the fact that you could carry 10 weapons on you at once. It was the way the enemies moved, it was the way that you could move. It was an overall different pacing and speed. And yes, a lot of that was a result of the technology at the time. We can't give you a reload animation because that's just too many lines of code we don't want to put in. Mm-hmm. You're carrying 10 weapons on you because we can't really get the computer to remember slots versus actual guns.
Yeah,
and then now that we have better technology able to do this, it's changed the feel a lot. It's changed the overall experience to an entirely different mood. So it's not necessarily going back to the original Unreal and playing it because it's a better game. I mean, honestly, the original Unreal was kind of stupid. I mean, it's like I played it, and the game doesn't tell you anything. Like you're really running around like a headless chicken, and so you hit the right button, it allows you to go to the next part of the train car you're on. But the feel of it, especially like the Unreal Tournament games, the Quake games, that kind of stuff, the overall pacing is a lot different, and that pacing was born from technological limitations. And even as technology got better, they kept the overall feel and spirit of it alive.
Well, it's less to keep track of, because let's take GoldenEye as an example. In there you had reload, but every gun had the same reload animation, so it didn't matter if you were reloading your starter pistol or if you were reloading a rocket launcher. It was the same disappear, sound effect, back up. And knowing that, you would think about what would happen to you in a fight if you had to take that second to reload. Versus if you take like a modern shooter, it's so much more complicated that it becomes frustrating to keep track of, because now you have to think, well, each gun is going to have its own specific reload. Some of them are magazine-based, so they're going to have to be pulled out. You got to pull back in and then cock it or whatever. Some of them you have to pop down a barrel if you're using an old-fashioned shotgun. I don't think you would in a modern shooter, but you see what I mean? Like every gun now is so unique that there's more for the player to keep track of. And it actually increases stress level, which is odd because this is a game and it's supposed to be fun.
Actually, you were just mentioning that, I'm sort of thinking, you heard of the mod, or the official DLC, whatever you want to call it, for Far Cry 3, the Blood Dragon thing?
Yeah.
I'm just remembering reloading the assault rifle, you twiddle the cartridge through your fingers for slamming it, reloading the shotgun, you pop it open, you're just flicking shells into it somehow through the air. So, but yeah,
takes skill, bro.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a game for making fun of itself. So I guess nostalgia unto itself is not really the issue here. I mean, nostalgia is nice, nostalgia is bad. I think what we really should be talking about is how it can go wrong. Okay. Like, there are lots of people who would turn around and say that, you know, original Super Mario Brothers, we shall never surpass it. There shall never be another game worth playing. There are people who will say the original Mario Kart on 64, which actually wasn't the original one, but Mario Kart 64 is just the best one of all time because it was old, because it was like this mechanics, because this mechanics. Now, I just want to get this out of the way because this has been a bit of an issue with some people. I don't like Mario Kart 64, and it has nothing to do with the game itself. It has to do with the... I'm not actually that phased, but it has to do with the fact the technological limitations at the time. One of the biggest tactics that, I'm going to use air quotes here, pro Mario Kart 64 players use...
Oh, you're going to get lynched for that, son.
For using the air quotes? Or?
They're going to drive by, and they're going to hit you with a banana peel, and then you're going to spin around, and be like, damn, that obstructed me for like a few seconds. Shit. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm stopped.
Thank you. But one of the biggest tricks is doing the jumping trick while doing something else with the control pad allowed you to actually phase through some obstacles, and you used to get speed boosts.
Yeah, you
And
could
then
do that on the Rainbow Road. If you did it right, you would actually jump to like the other half of the map and scratch off like 30 seconds on your race.
Yeah, and there's also the idea that all the racers had different stats, but you didn't know what they were. Like Toad is naturally a little bit faster, but has bad acceleration. Or I forget. I don't know what all of them are, but Yoshi's better at turning, Toad's better at going faster, and everybody else is ignored in the competitive scene. They actually have to, when they do tournaments, they have to plug in a Game Shark so everybody can play as the same character. But the game wouldn't tell this to you because the game menu just won't include that information.
Yeah.
The game could be cheated by doing this weird little glitch because the computer software just couldn't handle you trying to do those things at once. If you do 150cc, they make it more difficult by throwing bombs on the track, and because technology was not very good back then, these bombs, especially if you're doing 4-player split screen, the bombs don't load until they're right on top of you. So it no longer feels like skill if I'm able to evade the bomb. It now feels like pure luck because the game does not physically render it until it's so close to you, you pretty much either need to swerve into a wall or try time it. Like it does, again, it feels like pure luck. You could be doing perfectly fine and spontaneously bomb that just didn't load. So, as the Mario games got more advanced, we at least got to a technological level where you can't cheat.
I think you're saying it wrong. I think you're supposed to say Bob Omb. Because I saw Scott Pilgrim, and their band was called the Sex Bob-Ombs. I think we should just call them Bombs.
Bombs.
Yeah.
But it got to more advanced games as the technology advanced. You actually could render those things at enough distance away to give players time to weave around and plan their trajectories out. You didn't have systems where you could just hold down the slide button, wiggle back and forth. Well, okay, in Mario Kart, a double dash, you could get a mini boost, but that was actually a mechanic everybody could use.
Yeah, and they've kept that one. That's a mechanic that is in the Wii and the Wii U version. I guess the funny thing about Mario Kart is that we're on our 8th iteration. And so it's easy to think that Nintendo just keeps turning them out left, right, and center. But it's only been one Mario Kart per system.
Yeah.
They're just trying to make sure that like each of their systems has a Mario Kart game because the game, like people just love playing that game. And even if the specific mechanics do change a little bit from game to game, the overall spirit of the game is so enjoyable that people always will want to play that.
Yeah, and it just comes down to, again, you've got a large amount of passionate people who just stand by this original one as the best one of all time, and I don't see that, and a lot of people don't see it. It just, there's technical problems with it that are easily quantifiable. For the time, when it came out, Mario Kart 64 was one of the most advanced pieces of software out there, a fantastic game, yada yada, but technology has gotten better. Whether or not this has improved the Mario Kart games, I don't specifically know because I'm just using that game as an example. But we have gotten to the point where you can't really exploit as easily by doing hops and wiggling back and forth, where there is a little more balance with the items, and where if you are going to litter the road with mines, we can now render them for a long distance away. So saying Mario Kart 64 is the most advanced because it requires the most amount of skill, when the skill comes down to game exploits and split seconds, hope you don't get screwed by the random number generator, I don't really see how that's the best Mario Kart.
Right. It may require more technical knowledge and muscle memory to be able to pull off those moves like those hops and those exploits. So it may require more overall skill, but I mean at that point you're not playing the game. You're playing the meta game. You're playing your own version of it. And the thing I always thought was interesting is, if these things are supposed to be competitive sports, how come there aren't penalties? I mean, in hockey, stuff like that you wouldn't get away with. Even if you do something like icing where you shoot the puck all the way to the end of the ring, I mean, that is a penalty, or that's a fault. You can't do that.
You can't hit the puck from one end of the field to the other?
No, well, I was reading about that because I wanted to use it as a proper example, and apparently what happens is if they shoot the puck from one end of the ring to the other, and then everyone's skating after it, if they can't come to a proper stop, they're all going to crash into the windows and get hurt. It actually happened. Somebody died. At least that's what Wikipedia says, so maybe, I don't know, this is all bullshit. Maybe icing doesn't actually exist. But the point is, I mean, you're actually hurting a lot of these older games who don't have the advantages of patches and updated to the software to fix these exploits. Because as a developer, like I'm not a developer, but if I were the developer, I wouldn't want that. I would want to make sure that people are playing the game I set out to make. Otherwise, why am I doing that? It's the same struggle that like a painter goes through when they create a beautiful work of art and no one recognizes it for what it is. That's why Dave Chappelle had that huge breakdown, because people weren't getting his comedy. They were just laughing at some other thing. Weird examples to reference, but anyways. I mean, Mario Kart 64 is an example of a game where you would have to accept the fact that it's not perfect. And if you're going to at least treat it with the same respect that it would have wanted to have been treated with, you gotta put a stop to that kind of thing. Because then otherwise you're doing the game a disservice. It would be like not wanting to watch something that's only on VHS because you're not willing to get a VHS player. I mean, follow the rules. That's what games are supposed to be about.
All right. Well, I wasn't trying to get that far, but that was an interesting point. Yeah. I do like that. That wasn't really what I was aiming for, so I'm just gonna bring it back for a second. People really seem to like that one because it's the one they grew up on. It was the major one. I mean, let's face it, the Mario Kart that was on the original NES or possibly the Super NES, I don't know at this point, like that was literally flat land. The walls were represented by drawings on this flat land, and that's really all that was there. So
it would be like you were driving around on a board game.
Yet somehow drawings on the board game could stop you and cause you to run off the course. And, you know, the floor is drawn with lava. It's not actually lava. It treats it like lava, but, you know, it's drawn there. And
the drawing of the bridge is what you're supposed to drive towards.
Yes. But anyways, like this is a lot of cases, the first Mario Kart game a lot of people picked up. And people sort of pine for it, you know, back in the good old days when this is the most advanced one. This is the one they put all the hours into, which is why they know the exploits. They put all this whatever into. But that doesn't make it the best one. It was an early one. It was a great leap in technology, a great leap in style, and just overall how they were doing something. But you can't just say it's the best because it's the first one you ever played. Whenever I say Phantasy Star Online was the best MMO I ever played, I have backup points for it. Yes, technically speaking, it was the first. I admit that. But I felt a lot of what it did made it a lot simpler and a lot easier and just sort of overall more fun than a lot of the other MMOs I've played, which have died because of over-ambition. But I will at least back up those points. You know, the lobby system made sense. Making parties before going down to the environment cleaned a lot of the environments up, which meant that you didn't have to have it strewed a bunch of extra players. A lack of crafting actually added to the game because it meant that being totally dependent on item drops, you had a reason to get out there and you weren't necessarily trying to collect 50 scraps of leather with 10 sticks to make leather on a stick. Also, it was a sci-fi MMO that still had regular usage for swords and daggers and all sorts of things like that. So that at least had a lot to... But, okay, we're not going to go on and on about Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah, talking about the MMOs, though, World of Warcraft is a great example of a game where a lot of its players fondly recall the vanilla World of Warcraft prior to even the first expansion, Burning Crusade.
I love
vanilla
Warcraft, and I don't like World of Warcraft.
It wasn't because we don't like the fact that Blizzard is coming out with these extra expansions, although it has gotten a little out of hand. It was because...
A little?
It was because, out of hand is a big term. I'm trying to soften it a little bit. Like vanilla World of Warcraft was challenging, and it took time. It took coordination to beat those endgame raid bosses, and PvP was challenging. And apparently some of the classes got the short end of the stick. My friend was playing a rogue, and he hated every second of it, but then he hated every second of every other class he played, so I'm not sure if he's a good reference point. But the feel of playing vanilla World of Warcraft was different because of the way everything was contained into the smaller continent, and you felt more like you were coming up against the Horde if you were Alliance, or vice versa, a lot more often. And then I also really appreciated the way that it would make you hop onto a flying creature and then take as a taxi to your destination. And it didn't just give you the instant teleport like some of the more modern MMOs do. It made you fly there because your character doesn't have access to teleportation. You got to get on that griffin and fly out to Arathi Highlands like everybody else does. And that, to me, maybe not the most enjoyable thing to do from an interactive point of view, but from a game experience point of view, brilliant. It connects your character to the world. It gives you some downtime, so you actually have to get up and do something else for even a little bit. It was a solid choice.
Okay.
And it's also those kinds of solid choices that make World of Warcraft a better game, and it's not because it was one of the first MMOs I played.
Okay, just as a question, do they have teleportation now? I know they have flying mounts now, so technically speaking, you are your own flying taxi.
I haven't played the game since Burning Crusade, so I can't answer that for you.
Okay.
Oh, I'm gonna say that in Vanilla World of Warcraft, once you had access or you were a high level mage, you could just open up town portals to the major capital cities. So there were ways later on that you would speed up the process.
They were in canon.
Yeah. But my example would be more compared to like Guild Wars 2, which just lets you like go from zone to zone, even within a map, which is, I mean, it's nice from like a getting things done perspective, but that's the kind of innovation that I don't think actually helps MMOs. I think it hurts them because it makes what you're doing take less time and is therefore less valuable.
Well, I'm just a quick point on Guild Wars 2. I think it would have made a lot more sense for various quest lines to have some way of communicating with people, because the idea that I go out, do something, then I have to report back to the main city to talk to this person to then get permission to go out even further than I was before, it would have made far more sense if, because technology does exist in the universe, or even the magic exists in the universe, to just have some kind of mirror, do a spell, and now I'm talking to my tribune, and he's the person who's going to say like, congratulations, successful weapon test. We want you to now go to this area to help these people, instead of having to go all the way back and go all the way up.
Like, yeah, your reward will be coming to you in the mail.
Yeah, the fact that there's a waypoint system means I can do it easily, but there was an opportunity there to keep you out in the field more often without having to force you to run back to the city. And yeah, I think we discussed at one point it would have made sense if they just had hubs in sort of major areas. So there's the Asura Gate, because we have a reason to teleport around. We've got Asura Gates, but instead of having waypoints, just have each, like all of Or would have one camp area and it would have an Asura Gate and you could get to other places, and all of the whatever forest area would have one Asura Gate and use to get play. But anyways, we're not talking specifically about Guild Wars. I think one of the biggest problems we have in nostalgia right now is nostalgia blindness, such as people saying Mario Kart is the best Mario Kart of all time, and this is really a lot prevalent in Kickstarter, which seems to exist purely off of nostalgia. There's this whole idea that
Kickstarter.
You look at most of the video game projects on there, it's like, oh, harken back to the days of old to build this. Harken back to the days of old to build this. Now, as we said earlier, not every innovation is a good innovation. Some innovations are, some innovations aren't. Sometimes we get married to the bad innovations. It influences an entire culture, an entire genre, until next thing we know, we got Bloody ISO Real. But a lot of stuff on there, and even a lot of stuff that's popping up on Steam, are basically things people are making with RPG makers, little pixel sprite. Once upon a time, it was actually hard to make pixel sprites. It was hard to do that. You had to put time to the background, to effort, all that stuff. Now you can pretty much buy RPG Maker and throw that together yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to use the default character template, go ahead, but you're probably going to... I used to do that. I used to play a lot with RPG Maker. I would like take the sprites and I would just like go in pixel by pixel and recolor it to make it look like somebody. It was tedious as hell, but I mean, those characters saved a lot of time. Yeah, but I think it's sorry, but I think it's good that you brought up like old things that are still being used today, and I think certain mechanics are being held on to for nostalgic value when they actually do take away from game design. If you use like experience points in an RPG as an example, like when you had experience points in say the original Final Fantasy, so much of that game's imagination was up to the player to abstract, because you didn't know anything about your characters. That was pretty much all up to you to decide. You can only see so much of their spell, you can only see so much of how much this fight was breaking out. The enemies didn't move at all, so you have to abstract that like you would read a comic book. So when you use experience, it was supposed to be a metric for how much your characters have grown as people. and that with experience they actually do become better because they're using their past knowledge to improve themselves. But experience now becomes, and it was happening obviously before that with Dungeons and Dragons, but experience is just like another stat. You fill up the bar and then you get to the next level, and it doesn't really mean what it's supposed to mean. And it's also, if you look at, like, say you're walking around in Final Fantasy and then the screen does that and then you're in a fight. Well, the idea was you're supposed to feel like you're on this journey, and then on the way you come across these dangers, and then this fight here could be the fight that ends you. It's just as much a fight to the death as any other boss battle. And the reason why they couldn't do like enemies physically fighting you was because the engine just couldn't handle that. But now you have random encounters in RPGs even today, and it's more of like a tradition thing, which doesn't always work because it doesn't always make sense.
There's a lot of them where you won't see anything, and then spontaneously the screen flashes and you go to the combat thing. I mean, thankfully we do have a lot of RPGs now where you'll actually see blobs wandering around or some enlarged version of a standard enemy, and when it touches you, you go away. Anyways, I should have slammed my hand on the table because now I have to go all the way back to Kickstarter.
Why didn't you? That's why we did the hard stop thing.
Well, I'm actually finding it a bit annoying and possibly a bit rude, but...
Well, it's also a necessary evil.
All right. Well, there are just playing a lot of projects on Kick. See, now I have no momentum. There's a ton of projects on Kickstarter and even Steam Light that basically is trying to exist purely off nostalgia, basically throwing in a bunch of old mechanics because they're easier to make, and then saying, hey, look, this is a lot like the original Castlevania, or hey, look, it's a lot like this, a lot like this game, a lot like this, and then they have no merits beyond that. There's a lot of people who say, I enjoyed the original Ghouls and Goblins, so here's my version on Ghouls and Goblins, which pretty much all it is a bunch of references, and now I have my momentum again. And there even was an entire company which was making a lot of these RPGs, which seemed to simultaneously embrace nostalgia and also make fun of them for it. I forget what the company was called, but they had a bunch of mini RPG things. They did Cthulhu Saves the World, among other things. But they had a lot of the standard pitfalls when they turn around and have ways to avoid them. Once you beat a certain number of invisible random encounters in an area, you'll have the ability to turn them off and you now explore the area freely without having to bump into people. And the longer the fight went on, the enemies just became a little bit more powerful, so you could just stand there and break the game by heal yourself. You have to actually go forward and do something. So we have some examples which are good, but we also have, especially with Greenlight, a lot of examples of people just rehacking together, trying to just recreate this exact game. And sometimes they're looking for that feeling. Sometimes they're looking for, I want to re-experience this thing I had as a kid. I want to re-experience this great overall, whatever it was that I remember from when I was a child, when games were simpler, when games required different mechanics, different things. And then there's a lot of people that I think it's cheap to make a Mario clone these days, and you can do it so easily, and then you can put it on Steam Greenlight or put it on Kickstarter and make money off of it. I think that really is the huge pitfall. It's just a pitfall with, I think, Greenlight and Kickstarter in general, is a lot of people will try to pine to a different type of game that they've essentially just ripped off, thrown together, and the only redeeming value is, oh, hey, this guy calls the other person a spoony bard. Wow, I really feel like I'm in a Final Fantasy game now. This is really referencing it. Oh, there's little bird things, which they're chocobos. And I can't really think of any specific example off the top of my head. I do know that there has been a flood of them, and if you look around Kickstarter, thankfully most of these projects fail. But there's a lot of examples of people just, again, saying, I want to build something which reminds me of the good old days, and you look at the product and work, and you even look at their designs, their ideas, everything going forward, they don't have anything. They're pretty much just trying to recreate a game or a feeling they had when they were younger, but they're not really building a game. They're just trying to recapture a feeling. If you're building a game, you have to actually be trying to build the game. You can't just say, this is the feeling I want, and I'm picking video games to go through with the feeling. You have to actually know you have to have a better set goal in mind, because what affects you is going to affect other people differently. What grants you nostalgia may not necessarily grant me nostalgia. What grants me nostalgia may grant somebody else frustration. Saying Battletoads is a fantastically skillful game, I tried it. It's like, this is rote memorization. This is the epitome of what I believe makes video games bad. there's no skill here. It's all rote memorization and trial and error by the sheer virtue of you die and then have to start again. Whereas other people will say it's great, yada yada. So, I mean, we're all affected by this stuff differently. We can read the same book and have different opinions on what the characters looked like depending on how many scriptive words. We can watch the same movie and have different ideas of what was going on, unless it's a stoner comedy, in which case the director got stoned, wrote it, and for some reason he got $10 million to film this piece of crap.
Well, they all knew it was going to make money.
Yeah. But I think that's the big problem because nostalgia is based on a feeling. It affects everybody differently, and most of the time when people are making games or ideas with with aiming for that nostalgic warmth, that euphoric warmth, they're trying to make something that makes them feel good, ignoring what may have made everyone else feel good, and worst case scenario, they just photocopied another game.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing that I appreciate about the various generations and the way they look, and I would have to say that between the start of the Nintendo 64 to maybe the end of the PlayStation 2 generation is that like 16-bit and 8-bit games or artwork, yes, is a result of limitation, but it seems to just work as an art style because when you put a simplified art style out, or your character is more cartoony than he is realistic, it's easier for the player or the viewer to project themselves into what's happening.
Well, that's more of an aesthetic thing. I mean,
it is.
There's a whole discussion on lots of forums and places about aesthetics versus graphics, and the idea that graphics must always serve aesthetics. So, I mean, if you're going for that kind of aesthetic, that doesn't necessarily mean you're invoking, nostalgia. It could be that you just don't have a budget, so you're invoking nostalgia to cover up the fact you don't have a budget. But, at least as someone who just turned around, bashed a lot of that stuff, I don't want to, say 16-bit graphics are the problem. I think, if you're going to go for that, 32 wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
But
well, I don't think that's a problem either.
I
appreciate the fact that you can use that as a means to illustrate the kind of game that you want to make. Like, you don't feel like just because 16-bit has advanced since then that you can no longer revisit this particular art style. I do think that there is a lot of nostalgia just from our generation as to why we would even support this, is because we grew up on that generation. So for us, we're a little more bonded with it, and that look, much like a certain artist or a certain movie series defines our generation, that look does define a generation. So you never really need to use 16-bit. Not really. I mean, you can always just draw characters that look simple. Like Braid is a great example of a game that plays like a 16-bit 2D side-scroller with some more innovative mechanics because of the time control, but it just looks like the game that he probably wanted to make it look like. So you never really need to do it. So there's definitely an example of like nostalgia front and center being the reason why they went with that direction.
Yeah, but even if you take the 16-bit style away, even if you were to give it full, I guess it'd be 2.5, but whatever graphics, I think a lot of people play the Braid again for both platforming and time manipulation mechanics. I mean, I can think of lots of times in Mega Man where I make a jump and I kind of wish I could reverse time, and then once I have the ability to reverse time to undo a single jump, the potential for manipulation and possible scenarios and puzzles just skyrockets. So I'm not really quite sure where we're going at this point, because we know what nostalgia is. We know that it can be used incorrectly. So
not the best thing to do on our show to talk about where we're going.
Well, no, I'm asking you, because I'm sort of asked, like, what exactly do you...
Honestly, I think we covered everything that we wanted to cover. I think we just call it.
Yeah, I had no idea what the hell I was doing that time. I don't know. I mean, nostalgia can be used for good or evil. That really is what it comes down to. I mean, we've seen people exploit it, and we've seen it carry bad games. Like, I'll stand by my Mario Kart example. I'm sorry, at the time it was fantastic, but when you look at it compared to modern games, it has vast technical problems that I feel in some ways makes it unplayable. But, nostalgia keeps it going. Nostalgia keeps a lot of things going, and long after they should have died. And I don't think you can blanket say that. I think it's a case-by-case analysis.
I think you're right.
And
I'm curious to see what's going to happen when I get older, when I'm in my 30s, in my 40s. How am I going to continue to look at these games? But the last thing that I'll say, just to reiterate a point from earlier, is that when it comes down to what game I'm going to play, doesn't matter when it came out. It's just a matter of like where I am, what I feel like doing.
all right, that's a pretty decent point.
All right. I'm sorry that you find the heart stop rude. I agree with you. It is rude, but sometimes a man's just got to finish his thought. Also, I don't want you to feel like you have to be afraid to like get up in my grill.
Well, I mean, at that particular example, you did have a good point. You were running with a decent amount of momentum. I kind of felt like, I had a point to finish, but at the same time, you're very intelligent. If you start going on something, you probably have something good, and that particular example was something good. So it was a tie between I wanted to finish my point and I wanted you to do yours because you didn't have a bad point, you had a good one, so it was worth sharing.
It's tricky, but if you're thinking about your own point, then you're not listening to me as much as you could be. And when you're not listening as much as you could be, and I'm not just saying it's you, I do too, but what happens is because you're not completely focused on what I'm saying, you might miss an opportunity to touch on something that I said.
I think it also hurt that I really only had one closing sentence left for Kickstarter. Like, I still had, this is the wrap-up closing sentence, but at the same time, now it's being pushed so far away, the context for the closing sentences stops. I ended up going back and repeating myself a bit. Honestly, I'm just going to say for nostalgia, I didn't have much to add beyond, what I just summarized my closing point. It's been used a lot of time to sell games and keep them alive when really they should have been dropped a while ago.
Yeah, well, when we start talking about, like, specific examples, I think we factored in nostalgia to our examples and brought it up in different contexts, so that was quite good. We should stop these.
Yeah. So we got